thank you all so much for joining our breakout. This is sharing and learning from smart connected projects. I'm going to take a moment first for you to take in both the panel and our pictures and see what you think might be the same. Ladies representing in the house. This is unusual. Yes, that deserves it. We like to call that out, gents, because in our lines of business, it is not necessarily the norm that all four of us would be in the same room at the same time, speaking on the same topics. So before we go any further, I'd like to have our panelists introduce themselves, starting with Nicole. Yeah, we didn't get training on how to...
Training. Okay, can you hear me? Hi, I'm Nicole Smith. I am a managing partner in Verizon's Premier Enterprise segment, so I support some of our largest enterprise customers, including Duke Energy.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? All right, I'm Megan Anderson. I head up sustainability for the city of Raleigh, so we have a large community-wide climate action plan that we're working on, and I'll be happy to tell you a little bit more about that.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Deb Wojcik, and I have the pleasure and honor of serving as the Executive Director of the Research Triangle Clean Tech Cluster. We bring together industry, academia, and government to advance clean tech innovation and adoption across the state.
And I am your host, Vakesia Graves. I am with Duke Energy, Managing Director of Connected Communities, which is the vaguest title I have ever had in the 23 years that I have been with the company. Connected Communities consists of outdoor lighting, our digital infrastructure organization, and smart cities. And digital infrastructure is macro wireless, of which Verizon is one of our customers. And I also have the wonderful group represented here today. The solutions development team, please raise your hands because you guys are awesome. And in solutions development, we literally do that. We develop all of the solutions that our customers, we're looking for the problem that we're trying to solve for our customers. And that goes through this very fine organization. So not a lot of work for me at all. So I want to start with the summit's statement. Envision the connected triangle, a region where interconnected smart communities work together to create an extraordinary place to live, work, and visit for everyone. The triangle has set the standard in smart technology and connectivity, and now it is time to dream bigger. So I want to remind our panelists of that statement as I dive into the first question. And we'll just start in order. Sorry, Nicole. How does your work tie into this vision? And if you would, provide an example of a transportation project that might also work in the triangle.
Thank you, Vakesia. So the way that Verizon's work ties into the vision is that we are enabling our 5G deployment, densification of 5G in order to create a smarter, more connected community. So we're working at the federal, state, and local level to deploy this technology that's ultimately going to help all of our citizens be safer, be more connected, have a more enjoyable experience when they're on the roads. And so one of the projects that comes to mind when we talk about the larger vision is that we're working with a few municipalities, but specifically with the Arizona DOT recently. We are piloting a technology called Vehicle to Everything and Infrastructure to Everything, where as it stands today, your vehicles really are limited by their onboard sensors, which only have line of sight visibility. So we need to get beyond that line of sight and penetrate further into our infrastructure so that a vehicle can actually predict when a pedestrian is jaywalking a mile ahead of you. You're going at 60 miles per hour, and your vehicle can now have a heads-up display or just like the onboard display that's going to tell you that, hey, you need to slow down, or actually have the vehicle slow itself down. So it creates a safer environment, and it also can help create a better traffic flow, which we think is extremely important to any community and to the happiness of our citizens, right? Nothing is more frustrating than being stopped at every red light. So this kind of technology can actually enable you to hit more green lights via a technology where you can predict what speed you should go in order to hit more green lights.
I like that.
Right? So, and then we can do things like give priority to emergency vehicles or give priority to public transit so that it's a better experience, it's better traffic flow for everybody. Vehicles become sensors, and the city is able to get that data back and make better decisions with it. So this is exciting technology. Yeah, right. Yeah, and so it's definitely something that we are working to develop and deploy. And I'm pretty excited about it.
I'm having Back to the Future visions, which is really an old movie, but it had those thoughts. That is pretty cool. That is pretty cool. We got to talk more about that later. Megan, your response.
Yes. So I'll first just share a little bit about our climate action plan. Hopefully I know a lot of you in the room, so a lot of you might know about it already, but Raleigh came together with hundreds of folks from across the community to put together a big community-wide climate action plan. We're really proud of it. It was one of the first in the country to really embed not only greenhouse gas reduction, but also equity and building community resilience to the impacts of climate change. And so really when we think of sustainability and we think of connectivity, everything does connect, and even if you're thinking about a project that you wouldn't think connected to transportation, it does. So one thing that comes to mind is we've come together, one example where we've used data to map urban heat that Heather mentioned with Durham and Raleigh, and we've been able to build a ton of mitigation programs out of that. So we were able to look at and really come together with hundreds of people. Again, we were the biggest program they've ever seen in the country because so many people were excited to kind of help us do this data mapping. And so lots of excitement from the community to help us get that work done. And really we're looking at where is not cooling down, which can be really dangerous for the environment, for people over time. And so how do we change that? And so when we think of mitigation strategies, things like green spaces, things like this really cool titanium dioxide pavement technology that we used on the streets that basically really reduce heat and pollution. Things like even solar panels shading certain kind of spaces. There's all sorts of things you can do. And so we're thinking about how that connects to just quality of life for people as well. So I'll also touch on a few other things just because transportation is one of the biggest areas of greenhouse gas reduction and impact that we need to see. But I think the important thing is we always want to tie that to resilience and equity and climate impacts and make sure that those that are most vulnerable to climate change we're really thinking about and we're bringing everybody up together. So a couple other things that are exciting that also touch on transportation. Again, there's everything in the kitchen sink that we're working on. We're doing an e-bike rebate program we're working on now. It'll be actually, I think, as far as we know, the largest subsidy in the country for low to middle income at $1,500 and then $500 for others. It's going to be kind of small getting started as a pilot, so we know everybody's really excited about it, but thinking about how to get people out of their cars, and then and then even from an accessibility perspective, if folks don't have access to a car, can you have an access to an e-bike that can help you get around further as well? We have a ton going on with transportation electrification, so we really think about transportation electrification as a way to, first, we want to get people out of their cars, but we're very car heavy, and if we are car heavy, how do we make sure those are the cleanest possible? So we're working on our own fleet. So over the course of 10 years, we're working on how do we transform our own fleet. We have over 4,600 rolling vehicles, 2,500 on the road fleet. That's a really big fleet. We're converting what we can now, and then also thinking about clean alternative fuels for those other vehicles that just aren't there just yet for the technology. And when you think about that, we don't want to be in the business of owning all the stations in the community as well, but we want to make sure that this rolls out accessibly, so clean transportation is an option for everybody in the community. So we're thinking about those public-private partnerships. We did an EV mapping tool that we've got some folks in the audience that helped build that for us, where we're thinking about that from the criteria of equity and making sure folks that's accessible. So we're working on codes and ordinances with that, where we're going to require, hopefully, multifamily and other places where people rent and may not have control over, over 90% of charging happens at home. So let's make sure people that rent, which is a majority of Raleigh, it's getting to that point, have access to those kind of things too. So one last example I'll mention is some of you may have known that we just broke ground on our bus rapid transit. We're the first in North Carolina to roll this out, and we just had our groundbreaking this week. And that's going to really, really, really help improve access to transportation across the community. And also just thinking about those corridors, what the opportunities are for innovation, data collection, accessibility in other ways for the community as well. One really, really cool thing about the BRT is we have electric buses that we're looking at, and also a lot of those buses are going to be fueled through our wastewater. So we have a Neuse River recovery project, and over the course of the next several years, we're going to be capturing all of our wastewater, turning that into renewable compressed natural gas, and then putting that back in our bus system. This has been a moonshot project we've been working on for a really long time, on top of the moonshot to get BRT up and running. So just think about that for a second. I always like to just pause and say, you know what you're flushing down the toilet is going to actually fuel our buses. How cool is that? So just really cool, innovative stuff happening, and think about all those opportunities to include data and tracking to make our community a better place, which really is what smart cities and being connected is.
Wow, that was a lot. It was interesting. There'll be a test later. So I hope you were taking notes. You had me at titanium oxide in the sidewalks. I stopped thinking right there. That is amazing. You are doing so much great work. Deb, good luck following that.
I was going to say, I feel like I should do the mic drop for her. How do you follow that? I mean, these women are doing the work on the ground, making it happen. That's amazing. As I said, I work for a nonprofit, and my job is to understand what I can and amplify this amazing work they're doing. So when we talk about dreaming bigger and connectivity, I get to wear two hats with this. I said I get the pleasure of working for RTCC. I also have to kind of bring to the table that I am a research nerd by background, and connectivity was what I studied. I did network analysis looking at how organizations work together to advance their goals, how individuals communicate to make important decisions and innovate. So this is at the sweet spot. This is my Venn diagram kind of conversation. So I have a couple of different comments. One is, this EV infrastructure is an area that really has an opportunity to hit on our three main focal areas right now: clean energy, clean transportation, and smart utility technologies, right? We want to do it more efficiently, we want to do it equitably, and we want to do it in a way that provides a sustainable path towards a sustainable future for our communities. So we really focus on making sure there are economic benefits equitably distributed and enjoyed in a way that helps us preserve what makes North Carolina great in terms of our environment and our citizenry. And so when we think about things like the BRT, Megan, I didn't tell you this ahead of time, but I looked at that and I was like, yes, first in North Carolina. And that sets a boundary, right? Because what we really need is this regional type solution. I use the example of our river basins. We have 17 river basins here in North Carolina. Those do not follow our municipal boundaries. Those aren't by county. Those are the way that water flows. And what we need to do if we're going to be truly smart into the future, if we can dream bigger, is to think through how do we break down those barriers. Some of that old research stuff was around governance. How do we create regional governance structures through trust, through mutual information sharing, through data accessibility that allows us to advance? And transportation is a great way of doing that because we know there's easy flows. We know that people are not going to stop at the boundary, right? And so we immediately need to access that type of thinking and structure in order to advance us. We have a lot. Fleet electrification is another piece, right? We have a system of EV infrastructure. We also have amazing investment. There's a lot of talk right now. The NNO just put out, North Carolina is the epicenter of clean energy. I think it should also talk about clean transportation in that. I think the niche that we have is around this clean transportation, efficiency, being able to decarbonize our most greenhouse gas producing sector. And so thinking about all of that, thinking about how we might also talk about autonomy in that picture. How do we think about these things that our keynote we're talking about in terms of how we process the data in a way that allows us to learn and adaptively manage. So one of the things I'll just put on that is we're going to need to adaptively manage this as we create systems that lead us forward. I think learning together today and learning together iteratively in the future in a way that creates the communication flows that we'll need to carry us forward.
Wonderful, wonderful. The passion is amazing. I will speak briefly from Duke Energy's perspective. There are, contrary to a lot of firm beliefs, there are those of us within the utility organization who think beyond just the electron. There are those of us who actually do care about using the expertise that we have from an electric utility standpoint to help customers to solve a problem. So we do leverage our expertise, and we are in the EV space now, but we want to do it from a helpful perspective. Forget what you hear and see externally. We do have some really strong, passionate folks within the utility who want to help our customers. And Nicole and I were talking, we're enablers. You know, you need the power, you need the connectivity, and we are here to help. So that's my little spiel on behalf of our company. And I'm going to be a horrible moderator. Someone check me on time because I'm just talking, and so are they. All right, next question. Now that we've dreamt big, we're talking about the big dreams. Let's talk about the hard stuff. What do you see as the potential obstacles in achieving your vision? Let's start with Megan.
All right. So, you know, I always say, I think with this work, the biggest thing is like everything is good and important work, and you want to do it all. And how do you start, right? And how do you not get overwhelmed and there's just not enough time in the day? So I think just always for me, I'm really personally and professionally passionate about equity work. And so I think really always centering that. I wouldn't call that an obstacle. I'd call that an opportunity, but just want to say it's hard. It's really hard. You need data, but that's not good enough. Like that's just a start to kind of say, what kind of outcomes are we seeing in the community? Where can we start? And then we really need to have conversations with the people that are experiencing it. So I want to say, I think I wouldn't call that an obstacle, but I want to just center that and say that I think that's always really important. And data and opportunities to kind of track things help uncover opportunities to do better and make sure that we're designing things differently. We're blowing up the way we used to do things and we're doing it better, so we're including everybody. Other things that are difficult is even just kind of figuring out, we are data rich. I mean, if you look at Raleigh, this goes back to equity as well. We have a lot of resources and opportunities. We have a lot of data. It's a little overwhelming. We have some really awesome people on our teams that have been able to uncover some really cool stuff. I'll just say with our urban heat mapping, it's almost like one of those, if you build it, they will come. We didn't know exactly what we were going to do when we started, and then all of a sudden we have all these great partners that say, ooh, I can overlay this with my stormwater data, and we can actually prioritize where we're working and look at heat and flooding together and change the way that we're building infrastructure. Millions of dollars are getting rerouted to make sure that we're meeting people and we're doing it where we need to first. And I guess just another thing, so I'll give one other example. So we also, I think an opportunity that can be a challenge is we're really strong here in the Triangle. We don't do anything alone. And again, this isn't all my work. I'm just speaking about it, but this is really the work of the whole community. This is the work of a lot of really important, awesome, really smart people in the departments and in the community. So we have a couple really strong partnerships throughout the Triangle. We have a Solarize the Triangle program that was really successful. Another example, broke national records because so many people, you guys here, I keep pointing back to you, were so excited, signed up for getting solar. And so I think that was hard to put together, but we've got it done now. And folks like Deb are organizing us, and we need the Debs of the world to organize us, because once we figure out, like, we're big and slow. I'll just say, I think our biggest obstacle is we're government. Duke Energy is big and slow. We're big and slow, right? And so how do we get around that? And I think we need to work with folks that are more nimble. We've got smart people, we've got passionate people, but we also have a lot of rules for a good reason, but they get in the way sometimes. And so how do we unpack all that? How do we take advantage of all this money up at the federal level, trickling down to the state, to the local governments? That's such an amazing opportunity, so much red tape, but we can do it, right? So we need to organize. And so I'll say, I think we've established some really good starts where we know what our high impact areas are. We know what we want to do. We don't know exactly how we want to do it, but we've got some partnerships that we've started. We've figured out, I like to call it like working around like your water, right? How do you go up, over, around, and through to get to where you want to go when you think maybe you were just going to walk there and then never works out that way. So I hope I didn't wander too much, but I would just say I think the obstacles include just the red tape, being big and slow, but working around that by creating those connected partnerships, using that data to really look at who and how you prioritize what we're doing in different ways than what we've done in the past.
Good. Deb, Nicole, dealer's choice.
Sure. Well, thank you for that call out. And I just am so thrilled to be in a region that is doing so much innovative thinking, and it's just amazing and overwhelming and wonderful. And I've got all these notes and I'm circling some things. So I want to +1 on the equity and community engagement in general. One of the challenges is dispelling myths, right? So, and there are a lot of challenges because sometimes there are exemplars that might support those myths, right? Some of that is around security, data sharing, and those kinds of things, and helping community members feel heard, feel ownership, and feel engaged on an ongoing basis. I talked a little bit about adaptive management. I see that this has transformed recently, but having an adaptive management framework rather than a planning implementation, if it doesn't get implemented, it sits on the shelf kind of notion. So really having this active adaptive management where you are learning as you go in a deliberate iterative cycle so that you are always improving. Another thing is, I think Megan can speak to this best, but when you're looking at regional collaboration, your governance and timelines don't often align, and they don't even align sometimes within each municipality, right? I hear this from municipalities all the time. I can't get my facilities people, my fleet people, and these people. Everybody needs to coordinate internally, let alone between municipalities, so that can be challenging. I talked a little bit about boundaries. I think boundaries I could have a whole philosophical conversation around this because, I mean, you look at the practical ones, right? I live in Chapel Hill. There are people who live in our town but can't vote for this and then pay city taxes, not county taxes, and some don't pay city taxes. And it's good sometimes, not good sometimes, and everybody needs to be able to come together and understand that they have a role to play, especially when you get into some of these rural areas that we were referring to as part of the broader triangle. And I think, when I think about this, the last thing I'll say is, there are silos. And I have this drawing that I said, a lot of information goes this way, but we need it to go this way and this way, right? We need this to be a 3D diagram of communication, and that especially comes up when Megan referred to the money. I feel like sometimes with the IIJA, the bipartisan infrastructure law and the other funding coming through that can really affect this type of work, it feels like you're kind of in a money machine, and every time you go to grab it, it makes a new swirl, and we really need we need a coordinated effort, and somebody's probably got to turn off that air so we can get things settled and be a little more strategic, but it's really hard because we're in a land of FOMO right now. We are so afraid of missing these things that we kind of miss the opportunity to be strategic, and we're trying, right? And there are already amazing collaborations across the region, across the state, and beyond. But we need to really focus on doing this in a deliberate way in order to be able to see those long-term pieces come together in a way that benefits all of our communities.
That is the perfect visual for the federal dollars. In a tube, air blowing, money all around. Can't get it. Can't find it.
The land of FOMO, too.
And the land of oh my God. and being big and slow, all of those things. Nicole, any thoughts to share?
I'll just tag on a couple of things with what Deb said with dispelling myths. I think that is a huge one that we run into often because people think big data and they're watching and really it's not about surveillance. It's about safety and enabling a better experience for everybody. And a lot of this is we're talking about anonymous data that's just being able to be aggregated so that we can all make better decisions. Yeah. So the huge emphasis there on just having a transparent conversation with the community around what the goal is and how it benefits the constituents, I think is huge. The great thing about what I do in cellular data is it's everywhere. It's already there. So really the obstacle that we see most often is who's going to pay for the hardware to actually harness the power that you already have there and have access to. So I know we have a lot of conversations with auto OEMs, and they're kind of like, is Verizon going to pay for this? Are we paying for this? Is the city paying for this? Who's paying for it? So, I think that more conversation needs to be had there around, what value does it bring to the community, and where does it make the most sense for the bill to go to?
There is nothing that will stop a collaborative conversation more than who's paying for it. The whole conversation just goes silent. So yeah, it's funny. As Duke, I feel like both the city and Verizon, I'm like a weird combination of both entities. I'm going to take liberty and go to our last question because we've touched on it a couple times. How do we address equity? I think let's go there, and I'll open it up to whoever wants to speak to it.
I'll just quickly say that from a cellular and from a connectivity perspective. We don't see demographics. We don't care where it's going. We just care where are there people. Where do we need to connect people? We don't know who those people are, but we need to connect. We need to get them connected. But as it comes to something like EV and enabling, enabling the advent of EV and how that's exploding, I think that we do have a long way to go to make sure that we are getting EV charging equipment to more underserved areas of our community, because that's a challenge, and so I think Duke's doing a lot of great work there. So I want to commend you for that, and we just need to keep the conversation going to see where can we all play our part to ensure that we're equitably deploying those assets.
And I have to give Casey Gradley a lot of credit. She's my puppet master, and she's on my team. And Casey reminds me we have infrastructure. I've got 2.5 million lights everywhere. Is there a play there? Can we utilize our infrastructure to be broader and to help more of our communities? So thank you, Nicole, for the small shout out. I appreciate it. Deb, Megan?
I feel like Megan has to finish this one, so I'll go next.
I agree.
So I was going to say, this is not easy work, and I think it's really important. We've talked a little bit about multifamily units and how to get them resources. I will give a shout out to the Pole Vault program, and that gives me the opportunity to say that one of the things when I came into this role a couple of years ago is there was a lot more conversation about equity, and I really believe that needs to be those accomplishments, even if small for now, because it does take a lot of work, need to be celebrated. And I'll do a shameless plug. We have our Clean Tech Innovation Awards, and for the last couple of years, we've been doing an Equity and Clean Tech Award. And what's interesting there is it's not just about the results, it's also about the process. So one of the pieces, and I deliberately wrote this in as a stakeholder engagement person, this is part of my background, right, is like you have to design the process with intention to be inclusive, engaging, and and it has to be enduring in that way. And, it's interesting to me. I did my doctoral work in the rural areas of the Okavango Delta of Botswana, and the parallels, like who is included, who is at the table, who is called in, who is called out, and who is opening the door to that table, right? And that's not everyone in the room. That is a seat at the table and someone being asked in a real way. And sometimes that works well through community representatives and nonprofits and people serving those communities. Sometimes you have to do something different, and it is hard, absolutely critical work. So I would say that there are a lot of people who are expert in that. There are a lot of people who are doing that work very deliberately. And to me, I think that we have to recognize that it's hard and we're making steps, but we got to keep going, and it cannot be a checkbox.
Mm-hmm. Megan, take us home.
Well, I'll just say, I think building on what both of them have said, you said it's a process, and I'll just say, and that process is never done, to your point. Like, you're just iterating, and there's always more you can do. I'll give a couple examples just because I feel like for me, that's always the easiest way to kind of unpack what this might look like. So I guess when we're thinking about something like transportation electrification, I'll tell a story in a second about another thing that's happening. We don't want that to turn out in like 10 years to be that new equity story, right? You hear, and I think it's common, kind of something that human nature kind of just does, where you're like, oh, well, some people can't afford that, so we're just going to focus on who wants it now. That's exactly how we create equity issues, right? So if we're thinking about something like transportation electrification, we need to focus on, just like you were saying, the folks that don't have access to EVs right now, because you build a building, that building's there, we hope, at least for 50 years. If you don't put that conduit in, that conduit's going to cost 6 to 8 times more later on. So, thinking ahead to kind of say, we need to make sure the folks that aren't asking for it right now are included here, because that's clean energy, and they're not going to have access. If they finally get a vehicle, which those vehicles are coming down in price, there's a lot less maintenance. If you do it right, it saves you a lot of money, right? So we want to make sure that folks that don't have access and are getting left out of these conversations are included. And so, like, how do you think about that now, right? So by no means are we perfect, but those are things that we're challenging ourselves with to say, okay, like I mentioned earlier, what does that mean? So in some things we're using to try to think about data and actually worked. We got an award actually with RTCC with working on this, with mapping for this. So what are our criteria? What's important to us when we're thinking about where are the hot spots where EV infrastructure needs to go over time? Making sure that criteria includes things like small to minority businesses. So folks might show up and charge there for 15 minutes and stay, and there's more foot traffic. Now, is that tried and tested? We're still working that out, right? It's a new field. I'm learning all sorts of things about gas stations, mom and pop shops, how they make their money, they turn over. So there's lots to figure out there. Also, multifamily, we know that, right? More and more people are renting, more and more people are getting pushed out of Raleigh. If you're in multifamily, you need to have charging there. So let's make sure we're catching the new ones, and then we're looking at programs to create incentives for the existing multifamily units to install charging too. And then I'll just end with saying, so we're also working on a program. I mentioned heat and flooding are two of the biggest climate impacts in Raleigh. So we're really excited about a grant that we just got with NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association. It always tongue ties me. Really exciting opportunity. Again, want to give credit to the community. First city in the 18 years of the program to give a city this grant, and it's all about climate education and resilience in the community. We already have a watershed learning network. We work with Partners for Environmental Justice in our stormwater department on this program. We're going to expand that to heat, and we're going to talk about what's happening in your community. Look at the data, understand how government works, talk to the people in power, do projects in your neighborhood, make something happen. So when we have this data, we have these digital twins, we've got the urban heat mapping data, we're talking about priority areas that we want to put infrastructure in, we're talking about what the community can do. We have a Ready Raleigh emergency preparedness guide that talks about anything from a pandemic to a hurricane, to a heat wave. We know that communities that are more connected, that are having conversations about what do I do in my house, what do I do in my neighborhood, who might down the street need a little bit of extra help if something happens, those communities do better. And so having those conversations, but then I guess taking the step back to say, how did we get here? There were decisions that were made by government to put black people in low-lying areas of the city. We discharged wastewater in those areas. Those areas are flooding. Those areas have a lot of other disparities. Those areas don't have as many trees. Those are the realities that we've created, not only government, but government included, other things that we're overlooking. And so let's not keep making those mistakes, and then let's unpack and fix some of the stuff that we've done and be honest and transparent about it as we're doing that. So again, I'm not saying we have all the answers and we're doing this all right, but we're trying to kind of figure out how to use data, how to have conversations, and to what Deb was saying, it's, don't just stop at the data and say, ooh, I know what to do now. Like, you really have to go into those communities and have those conversations, because they're going to know what they need. And sometimes they don't want to have that conversation, and that's okay, and that's understandable, because why would you have trust? So I think there's just so much there. Back to the obstacle, it's hard work, but I think trying to have those conversations and unpacking things and being honest about what you're seeing and starting there is a good place to start.
Excellent. I am going to forego our last question to give our audience an opportunity to ask us questions. We only have 5 minutes left. And again, there's a lot of passion up here. So please take advantage of the depth of knowledge and interest we have in this topic around transportation. Any questions from the audience? Oh, don't be shy. Yes.
Hi, how's it going? Thank you guys so much for spending your time with us today. My question is, particularly for Megan, you talked about a lot of the initiatives going on right now that are underway, and they're so exciting. What are some things that you're looking to do in the future that you're potentially looking for help for with vendors or other businesses in the community?
Yeah, no, thank you. So great question. If anybody couldn't hear, she said, what are we looking to do in the future with vendors and others in the community? So one thing that we've been talking a lot about, and Heather and I, we've been up late nights burning the midnight oil on this, is, again, you should feel proud being in Raleigh in the Triangle area. We're really on the map. There's a lot of things happening. We are trying to tackle things. So one big opportunity is we're a finalist for a Bloomberg grant, and the thing with that is the Bloomberg grant aside, we're already trying to talk about this stuff, right? And so that's why we're a finalist for this kind of thing. Looking at things like closing the racial wealth gap and combating climate change at the same time, no big deal, 2 small things, let's figure that out. So yeah, there's a big challenge right there. You tell me what that means. You tell me what you think you can do. You tell me what data you have out there. There's really cool data. Heather and I were just in Atlanta about this, and the Black Wealth Equity Index is a new data set that's out there that we started to look into. We were looking at all these data sets, looking at disparity information, things that we're not, how do you think about, like, who has insurance, and where do people have insurance, and who are those people that don't have insurance, and why don't they have insurance? I mean, there's all these things to unpack. Is it workforce development? Is it economic development drivers? So I would say there's a big challenge that I'm not going to give you the answers for, because we're all going to struggle with it. But I think closing the racial wealth gap and climate change do go together, and the more and more and more you talk about it, the more that's there. One other thing is we're really excited talking about something like a climate change corridor. So Raleigh, again, has a lot going on. We have a really good history of all this really great partnership throughout the Triangle, lots of urban spaces all around here. Charlotte has all this banking industry, tons of public-private partnerships. They've done all these innovative projects too. We've got Greensboro right in the middle. They just got $8 billion more for an EV battery investment happening there. All these urban corridors and spaces, tons of stuff happening, lots of attention being paid, lots of money out there. What does a climate change corridor look like? How do we do public-private partnerships? Who wants to be a part of that? And what are we actually doing with that? So how do we get the attention to get the money, to get the resources to do something? But who are we bringing that back to? So those are two just big things I'll put out there that may be of interest for people to talk about.
We have time for just one more question. Yes, sir.
Miles one way. On an EV bike, I could do that in an hour or less, but not in these roads. These roads take my own life. I live like 600 miles from my office, but I'm not biking it because I've got cars go 60 miles an hour next to me, a shoulder, that kind of thing. So it'd be nice to see these non-vehicle paths, bike paths, little bike paths, and so forth. What's been done there in trying to connect that to make it easier to make it more walkable, more bikeable?
You've got 30 seconds for that response.
Great question. And not sure if you heard this earlier, but I'll just really quickly say, so yes, we want people out of their cars. That is the first number one big thing. Reality is we know people are going to be in their cars and it's not going to change overnight either way, right? So let's make those clean cars when we can. But we have hundreds of miles of greenways in Raleigh and we keep talking about, so why did we get those greenways? We created those greenways because those were, we bought those out because we didn't want more people to live in the flood zone. We didn't want people to flood. So those flood. So we're in this interesting place now where we want to make those corridors for people to commute to work, but they also flood, and that's what they're supposed to do, and then they're full of mud, and then people are like, I want to use it today, but that's a lot of, so there's a lot there that we got to figure out, but there's also hundreds of miles of trails that we're trying to connect more to work on. I mentioned earlier really quickly that we have an e-bike subsidy pilot program that we're pushing out because we want to get folks access to other transportation options where it creates more mobility and accessibility for people. We're doing codes and ordinances that actually try to require, these aren't popular, but looking at things like not having drive-throughs in some parts of town that are supposed to be really walkable, because if you're in a wheelchair or you're walking or you're trying to get around and you got to go out in the street to get around all these cars and there's all that smog, there's tons of places where you can still have a drive-through. But we're looking at walkable areas. How do you create walkable spaces where people can get around without getting in their car? How do you have those connections? Another one that we're working on is, there's a grocery store right here, there's a big neighborhood right here, but you got to go like this to get there. How do we make sure that when that's a possibility, we make that connection so you could walk or bike over to the store when you can? So those are kind of things we're trying to catch. We are such a fast-growing city, so many opportunities, and then that's just also a big challenge because we're growing so fast. If there was one thing I guess I should have said earlier with development is it is a big obstacle, but it's also a big opportunity. So just trying to catch that before it gets too far. We're trying to fix it later.
Well, in fairness, that was a big question. There's an entire panel on that question that we can create.
Jim's comment this morning about the 1,704 deaths in that scene.
Mm-hmm. It is. But we're not going to end on life and death. We're going to end on happiness and dreaming bigger. So please join me in thanking our panel for their time. And Heather, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Absolutely. So thank you, Duke Energy, for helping to sponsor this. And again, another round of applause for our wonderful panelists.